Just a few weeks back, Sony released their 20mm f1.8 G lens, and man, I was excited to get this thing in my hand, and here it finally is. My name is David Zhou, and today I wanted to share my review of the Sony 20mm f1.8. I want to talk about its build quality, share some images and videos shot with the lens, compare it to the Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master lens, and tell you whether or not I think you should buy it. Roll that intro, baby. So let's just jump right into it. First off, build quality. The Sony 20mm f1.8 looks, oh wait, that's the 24 f1.4. My bad. The Sony 20mm looks very much like the 24 f1.4 G Master lens. Huh. That's the first thing you're gonna notice, is the fact that the build quality between these two lenses are nearly identical. Save for the 20mm being slightly smaller and lighter, they share the exact same blueprint when it comes to the housing of the lens. They're both made of the same material, both have the same control rings, the same switches, and the same buttons. The only real difference on the outside is the fact that the G is not the signature Sony premium orange, rather it's just a lackluster black. But this bit right here, the similarity in build quality, is a very new move from Sony. See, the Sony G series lenses have always been good lenses. You've had the likes of the 12 to 24 f4 G lens, the 90mm f2.8 macro G lens, and even the video lenses like the Sony EPZ 18 to 110 f4, which were also branded under the G series. They've always had a good build quality, but they've always had their own unique aesthetic for that line of lenses. But now, this lens shares an eerie amount of similarities with the 24 GM. And that's a good thing. The G Master line is supposed to be Sony's best of the best. La creme de la creme, the 1% of the 1%. Or at least that's Sony's aspirations. But to give the build quality of the GM line to a G series lens, but at a G series price, that's the interesting bit here. They've gone ahead and put an aperture ring on this 20mm f1.8, and that's always great when you get more physical lens controls and have to rely less on electronic communication. You can either manually set the aperture or set the ring to auto for the camera to control it. And the beauty is they added a D-click switch, which lets you remove the hard stops of the ring. So for photos, you can leave it on the clicked version and you can have your aperture set to whatever you want and not fear accidentally, drifting away from that aperture. But for videos, you have the option to declick your aperture ring and rack aperture smoothly. On top of that, for more manual control, there's also a autofocus to manual focus switch and a programmable button. If you find yourself running out of custom buttons on your camera, here's an extra one. Finally, you've got yourself a nice rubber focus ring that has a linear focus throw, which means you can reliably use it for manual focusing in videos. Top-notch stuff, honestly. The similarity in quality doesn't end there. Let's talk about image quality. In the lab, I first tested sharpness. When looking at the center of the photo, the Sony 20mm at f1.8 delivers sharp photos. When compared to the Sony 24mm f1.4 GM, they produce nearly the same center sharpness. As you go up in the f-stops, both lenses continue to deliver tack sharp quality as one would expect. In the corners is where you start seeing some of the differences. The Sony 20mm doesn't deliver the sharpest corners when wide open at f1.8. As a matter of fact, I believe the Sony 24mm has sharper corners even wide open at f1.4. But stop both lenses down to f2.8 and you start seeing corners becoming pretty sharp. And by the time you get to f4, both lenses have tack sharp corners. When looking at photos from the 20mm lens, I do note that there's some amount of chromatic aberration, but the wizardry of the glass elements and extra low dispersion elements that Sony uses, chromatic aberration was honestly nicely controlled. There was a very minimal amount of it. And while we're on the topic of the construction of the optics, this lens has 9 rounded aperture blades, which combined with a wide f-stop like f1.8 and being near a subject, you do get some creamy,
Borkalicious photos.
if albeit slightly hard-edged balls, but nonetheless. Next, I wanted to see, with a focal length as wide as 20mm, how well does it handle distortion? Well, shooting against this gridded pattern in the lab, I could see a very minimal amount of pincushion distortion, but in real-life examples for shooting architecture and real estate, it's not noticeable at all. Lines are straight, right out of the lens, without any correction in post-production. Speaking of real-life examples, one of my most recent jobs was photographing the Raymond James Stadium for their website update. And for part of that shoot, I used the new 20mm, and I was very happy with the images I got. When you're talking about tack-sharp photos, especially at f4, combined with good contrast and color rendition, it's hard not to love the images produced by this lens. On top of those photos, I took the 20mm with me out while Annette and I ran errands and shopped, and it shot some incredible looking footage. We're talking rectilinear or nearly distortion-free wide-angle footage that's sharp and crispy. It operated super well since the 20mm on the Sony a7 III was such a small, lightweight package. It was really easy to throw it on the Weebill S gimbal and take it with me throughout the day. One last thing I noted was the autofocus was fast and pretty noiseless, just like the 24mm. It focuses not only fast, but smoothly. I decided, just for the sake of thoroughness, to test the focus tracking ability on this lens. For comparison, here's the footage of me walking up to the camera with the Sony 24mm G Master lens and how that performed. And here is the footage of me walking up to the camera with the Sony 20mm G lens and how that performed. As you can see, it tracks incredibly well. It's smooth and it's pretty responsive. At this rate, any autofocus quirkiness will really just come from the camera bodies themselves. So what's my conclusion? Overall, I'm really impressed with the photos and videos that this lens can deliver. Upsettingly so, as a matter of fact, because a little over a year ago, I was thrilled when I found out about the Sony 24 f1.4 being released, and I immediately bought it. I was honestly like way early in the pre-order process. It was, and still is, my favorite lens that never leaves my camera body. See, 24mm was the focal length where you get a wide field of view, but it's also not super wide. You could still shoot some incredibly cinematic close-ups, but also shoot some great wide-angled shots. As a matter of fact, it was a focal length a lot of YouTubers loved, even Peter McKinnon and his love for the Canon 24 f1.4 L series lens. But the one thing that you couldn't really do with 24mm on full frame was truly selfie mode or vlog it. If you held out the camera by the base of the lens and tried to vlog, it was like borderline claustrophobic, unless you extended your camera further out with like a GorillaPod, but that's pretty exhausting, honestly. But on a 20mm lens, well, it becomes incredibly easy to vlog. Just look at this footage. I'm holding this camera and lens at arm's length, holding the base of the lens, and you get a refreshing amount of background in your composition. I could see this being the new vlog lens for a lot of YouTubers and content creators out there. So here's the verdict. Why am I comparing the 20mm so much to the 24mm? Because the 24mm G Master lens is one of the best lenses I've ever used made by Sony, and it costs around $1,500. The 20mm lens that was just released is about 95% of the 24mm's performance for $900. That's 95% of the performance for 60% of the price. If you want a wide-angled lens for architecture, landscapes, real estate, vlogging, travel, food photography, any of those and more, the Sony 20mm f1.8 G lens delivers. If you want an extra 5% of sharpness and performance and you need it to be a little tighter of a focal length, then the 24mm f1.4 GM is the better choice, objectively speaking. But man, this new 20mm from Sony absolutely kills it in every department, from build quality to image quality, and even significantly in the price department. There are a few lenses out there that I think are niche, and I could recommend them based on, what the situation, the type of photography and videos you want to produce. But then there are lenses like this one that I could genuinely recommend to just about anyone. And that's because this is the kind of lens that will just live on your camera body. And as always, links will be in the description down below as usual to check out this lens, the 24 G Master, as well as any gear I use to produce this video. But if you're looking to get the 20mm G lens, I'd recommend pre-ordering now, because if it's anything like the release of the 24 G Master, you might be on a waiting list for quite some time. I got my copy really early, but some people had to wait months to get their copy. So what are your guys' thoughts on this lens? Love it, hate it? Let's talk about it in the comment section down below. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a thumbs up to appease that YouTube algorithm overlord. If you want to see more content just like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. And as always, 10% ladies and 90% gentlemen, I'll see you in the next video.